Well, here we go, guys. Maiden voyage of the I Hate Football podcast. We're doing a little bit of a rebrand, a little bit of a relaunch of the original podcast that I had going on. We won't get into the previous names. We're looking forward, looking ahead. So want to welcome everybody to the I Hate Football podcast. My boy Will from 305 Sports Now. We're going to give you guys a little. There it is. Repping the hometown right there. So going to get into a little bit of a recap of the 2024 season for University of Miami. This is part of a series I plan on doing and kind of touching on the ACC as a whole, but wanted to take this opportunity to get together with my boy whose podcast I've been on several times. It's been a little bit, but somebody I've known for a really long time, somebody who's allowed me to land on their podcast and and speak a little bit and he's helping me out now, getting back started with it, after a little bit, but been looking forward to this for a minute, man. So what's going on, buddy? How you been?
Good, man. Good. Q. It's very good to be back on your show. It's very good reconnecting with you. Like has been mentioned previously, he and I go way back, almost 30 years. To be frank with you, man. Yeah, long time, 30 years, man. The old New Jerusalem over in Kendall, which we just finished talking about a couple minutes ago before we hit record. I have to say something, man. I love the new name of the podcast because I know we all get that frustrated feeling with our teams. The I Hate Football. So I have to say, I think you might either have tied or you've surpassed John from Cafecito and Cane for the most creative name for a football podcast in the entire podcasting kingdom known as the podcasting world, man. So I used to tell John, I'm like, bro, you have the most creative name. I think you have the best name out there, but I think I think you might have just dethroned the great Cafecito. I'm sure it makes some fans angry for saying that, but
listen, man, I would gladly take second place on that one because that I definitely love the name. The Cafecito and Canes definitely hits, especially if you're from Miami. That one, like as the kids say, if you know, right?
Yep.
That's Cafecito, Canes, right? Those are two Miami staples right there.
Just blend, man.
100%, right? Just blends perfectly. But for me. And anybody who knows me, I won't get into favorite teams or anything like that. But it's every Saturday and every Sunday. My teams haven't combined, haven't won titles, and I don't even want to get into how long it's been. But it's been a long time on both ends, and it makes for as much as I love sports and as much as I love football being the number one sport I love, it just. On a every weekend basis, man. The hair I don't have, they have me, pulling out, and I hate them so much, and I can't stop watching. So it's just one of those deals, man. Like I said, it's a hate. It's not even a love hate. It's a hate love, relationship at this point after so long, but. They what they do is they make just the sport in general, man. They've done such a good job of making it a just a year-round thing, man. Even in the off season, nothing beats a sport. If you look at I think it was for 24, if I'm not mistaken, of the 100 most watched programs on TV, 97 of them were football programs.
Yeah.
Which insane, right? When you talk about, the NFL owns Thursday, Sunday, Monday, and even in the off season, they still run ratings and everything, man. So, at the end of the day, man, it's what people want to listen to and want to talk about. And it's, what better way to entertain than to talk about football, man. So, like I said, man, let's do this thing, man. Let's talk about a program that you're so familiar with and so locked into down there in Miami, man. Let's talk about the Canes and the 24 season. From where I'm sitting, man, it was one of those seasons that everybody was loving, right? 9-0. Everybody's feeling good. You got the leader in the clubhouse in terms of the Heisman with Cam Ward. And then November hits, right? And they go 2-2 and end up the season 10-3 after such a promising start. And, you know, everybody's looking around kind of trying to figure out, well, you know, what the hell just happened? You know, how did we go from, you know, 9-0 to 10-3? Right. So, you know, curious to get your opinion and the pulse of the people down there, man. And what are people saying?
Well, a lot of people feel I'm always been an optimistic guy, and I think 10 wins was a success. If you look at the trajectory of the team going from 5-7, 7-5, which could have been a 9-win team even with Van Dijk at QB, and then going 10-3, I see it as a positive in the sense that we did win 10 games. Okay, so that's the one factor that I will say. If you ask about, I would say maybe 60 to 65% of the fan base, they were disappointed because we had such a good offense and we had such a great start and we had such a good team overall, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that they feel like it was a disappointment. Because most people, if we're honest with ourselves, we were going to be happy with 10 wins, but we also felt in the offseason that 10 wins would get you an ACC berth and possibly an ACC championship game and possibly a berth in the college football playoffs. The fact that it didn't, because we had two very crucial losses to ACC teams towards the end of the season, that was pretty much was a nail in the coffin for a lot of people. So that's the pulse. It's like, even though 10 wins is a lot, and we had all these accolades on offense, we had all these guys rise up and become studs. Cam probably going to be a top 3 pick, you know, coming into the draft. It was still disappointing because we could have done more. And the thought process is, if we would have had Cam Kitchens and James Williams back there versus Mish Powell and Jared Harris, because they knew what to do, despite despite their flaws as players, and so on several occasions they knew what to do, and you never had those mishaps, you know, in coverage. This team could have probably won the national championship. I just thought they were that good. I mean, you couldn't stop anybody on offense, and they scored at will. You had a top-notch offensive line. You had the best quarterback in college football. You had one of the best running back rooms in college football as well. You had a very solid receiving core led by Xavier Restrepo, who was just dynamite, you know, throughout the whole season. And then you had Elijah Arroyo, who runs like a wide receiver, being covered by linebackers and strong safeties as well. So it was just like, who are you going to stop on this team? Because Florida State played to not let Cam score on them. And what happened? David Martinez bullied them all throughout the game. So you really couldn't stop this team. So the fact that we had this great offense and the defense couldn't stop a cold, you know, in particular, that's something that really did bother, and that's something that really did upset the franchise. So for a lot of people, we underachieved because we had this great team. We just didn't get to the championship game, and we didn't get into the college football playoffs. But for me, I think the program is moving in the right direction, especially with the defensive hires. And I do think 10 wins is something you could build on, despite what the 247 rankings were, even for a recruit. And we're going to get into that, but I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and man, you know, so many, you know, great points right there to touch on, man. And I think, you know, what's crazy to me is, you know, before the season started, right? If as a Canes fan, right, they come to you and go, "Hey, would you take 10-3?" I would imagine, right, and totally speculating here, but I would imagine that probably 85 to 90% of people would have taken 10-3.
Absolutely.
Right. I think if you're looking at it, right, no context, right? No anything, right? And if they tell you, hey, would you take 10-3? Right? Knowing that you haven't won 10 games since 2017. Right. I would imagine that the majority of people go, hell yeah, I'll take that. I'll take 10-3. But then the season starts, right? And I think all these, you know, now we're, you know, they're 4-0, 6-0, 8, right? So now, you know, in the midst of the season and how this thing starts to you know, to play out, now you're going, well, no, I mean, no, I don't want 10-3. You know, I don't want 10-3. I want, you know, I want undefeated. You know, I want 12-1. You know, again, you never root for a loss, but like something something you're comfortable with, especially based on, you know, what's been, you know, the norm since, you know, again, I think we're going to call it what it is, and they've underachieved since Mario got there. I think everybody could agree on that, right? It doesn't matter how big a fan you are and the whole deal. It doesn't matter how glass half full you are. I think everybody can be and be honest with themselves and say they didn't bring Mario here from Oregon, to go 7-6.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They didn't bring him here, to go, 5-7. Right. Like, so, but again, right. The season starts, you're 9-0, you're going, hey man, expectations have changed.
Mm-hmm.
We got the projected Heisman winner,
Mm-hmm.
an offense that nobody can stop. But then, reality sets in, right? The offense can't if the offense wasn't rolling, you weren't going to win. So that's what happens. You go to Georgia Tech, and the offense doesn't show up. The defense gets gashed. I mean, Georgia Tech runs for, I don't know how many yards they rush for, but it was one of those games where, the offense, really wasn't on their game. The defense didn't do anything, and of course, and they had a chance, right? So like the very last drive of the game, they had a chance to win, but they couldn't protect Cam at the end, and he fumbles, and the rest is history. But it's amazing. It's amazing what expectations kind of start to to make you think kind of as the season goes on, right? Like I said, you get to 9-0, you're expecting for them to win out because you're playing. I think if we're being honest, Georgia Tech wasn't a better team. If we're being honest with ourselves, Syracuse wasn't a better team. But it just can't. It just the defense, right? The unit that everybody was so frustrated with, the entire season, it finally kind of came to a head. The offense couldn't bail them out, and they end up losing. And of course, they end the season, 1-3, and they not only do not make the ACC title game, they don't make the playoff. And here we are, right? That kind of segues, into National Signing Day. A class that was supposed to be, at the very least top 10, somewhere probably closer to 7 or 8. You get guys you commit, Gavin Nix, who was not only your best linebacker commit, but linebacker being a huge need for this team. With this recruiting class coming in, he decommits, ends up at Oregon. You have Drake Stubbs, another huge position of need, especially with Cam and James Williams entering the draft. He's your best DB, at the very least, your best safety, right? And one of the best safeties in the country. Not only does he flip, right, but flips to Florida, right? And flips to a Florida team, with Billy Napier seemingly being on the hot seat, and a guy who listen, kudos to him, because the class that he put together after a lot of people were expecting him to not finish the season, much less be there to usher in, a new class. I mean, I don't know how he did it. I mean, they overachieved, right? And Lagway and whatever everybody wants to make of that season, but a team that really wasn't supposed to be beating out Miami for recruits based on the trajectory, of the teams and the way the seasons went, especially Miami, kicking the hell out of them, over there in the swamp. And so, that kind of added insult to injury, right? So not only does the team finish 10-3, now you have a recruiting class that's subpar, for a guy who, and a staff, right? Who, what's their calling card? What do they hang their hat on is recruiting. That's Mario's game. For what Mario isn't, and I think it doesn't matter how big a Miami fan you are, right? You have to accept the fact that Mario has shortcomings, in certain respects, right? But where he doesn't have shortcomings is on the trail. Everybody says he is an animal on the recruiting trail. He's a guy who grinds. He's a guy who doesn't sleep. He's always on the phone. He's texting. He's in contact with people, with players and parents and the whole deal. So for a guy whose calling card it is to lock in, to lock down, top recruiting classes, to finish 13th after a 10-win season, stings a little bit, right? So it's kind of like this, man. Like we were, it was such a high for a long period of the season, and now you fast forward only a month, and the feelings around the program were surprisingly, kind of like in the gutter a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, I'd imagine down in Miami, you were probably feeling that, and touching base with the guys who you collaborate with and everything, probably even more so.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because if you look at we get a little obsessed sometimes with stars, and let's be perfectly honest about that. But if you look at the quality of the 2025 recruiting class, there's a lot of very good players on that staff. And I think Hayden Lowe just got his 5th star, and that's a guy that we recently picked up, was recently committed to USC. So that helps out as well. But the Miami Hurricanes they picked up some quality guys as far as positions of need. They picked up Jabari Antoine, who everybody in the country wanted as well. You know, the former LSU commit, he commits to Miami. Chris Ewald, who was committed to Michigan and to becoming a Cane. Bryce Fitzgerald out of Columbus is incredibly underrated. You could put the kid at wide receiver or safety. He's a multidimensional athlete as well. Then, of course, you have Joshua Moore, the wide receiver, coming in as well. Dylan Upshaw coming in as well. Gerard Pringle. One of my favorite recruits on this class is actually a center, SJ Alafaituli. You know, in general, he's going to anchor that offensive line real soon. After this upcoming season, I don't think we're going to need another center again, because I think it's his job to lose Max Buchanan as well. So even though the rankings say 13, we did get a lot of quality guys. Okay, so that's one thing I want everybody out there who's watching the show to know. We did get some quality guys. It's nothing to sneeze at. Then Miami picks up in the transfer portal at the end of the season, and they again add depth to a position that was very weak this past season, which was defensive back. And they not only loaded up with guys, they loaded up with guys that have 2 qualities: experience and size. Okay, so there's experience. You already know what you're getting out of Xavier Lucas. You already know what you're getting out of Ethan O'Connor. You know what you're getting out of Emmanuel Carnley as well. You know what you're getting out of Charles Brantley as well. We've seen these guys in action. There's film on these guys. We know that if you put them in the right situation, they're going to play very well. And then, of course, then we have, you know, the guys as true freshmen coming in as well. So, yeah, numerically speaking, Miami doesn't look as good as it did in years past. But oddly enough, they were losing. And they had these great recruiting classes. They finished with 10 wins, which is an improvement, yet they lose guys. I also think, and this is an opinion, this is alleged, I'm probably going to get killed for this. I do think that the fact that Billy Napier wasn't fired, that potential buyout money was used for NIL, and that's how you were able to get guys like Dallas Wilson, a guy like Drake Stubbs. Remember, for people, I got an argument with a Gators fan at work, because he said that, he was arguing that I have no evidence, but I look at optics. Okay, that's Stubbs' 3rd team, and supposedly he grew up a Florida Gator fan. You know, usually when you're a fan of a team growing up, you know, you kind of tend to automatically commit to that team. Not all the time, but Duke Johnson, the Canes were not the best team. He was going to be a Cane no matter what, and Drake didn't do that. Drake was first committed to USC. Then he went to Miami. He went to Miami. Chevis Jackson, for all his flaws, possibly as a coach, he was a pretty good recruiter, because he's the one that set that class up, that the guys I just mentioned. And he decided to go to Florida, and I think NIL does play a role with that. And let's be honest with you, it's a new era in college football. So that's how I view it. Some of the fan base, again, they're obsessed with numbers, right? As well. I also say, again, you have to look at the quality, look at the film. That's another thing too. I remember a guy criticized me a little bit because I gave so much credit to Vince Schaefer's, and the guy came at me because I said he was because he's a 3-star and wasn't qualified to be a Cane. The guy was like the best player in Nebraska's defense last year as a true freshman. Why? Because sometimes these guys are underrated as talents, you know. So that's where I think where we're at, you know, as far as recruiting goes. So I'm not all that upset about being number 13. I look at the players we got, the positions of need we got, the quality of players we have as well. And again, the transfer portal also helps self-correct that as well. And going back to your comments about Mario's shortcomings, I still believe that that's somewhat true. But one of the things about Mario that he had a reputation for was being a bit stubborn, unwilling to change. He broke that narrative this year. Cam was allowed to audible. We had an air raidish offense where we passed 55% of the time versus 45% of running as well. And we were the number one passing offense in the country, you know, so, and number one scoring offense as well. So Mario is willing to adapt, and he proved that as well. But again, timeouts and situational football, he still needs to work that. But I think he did better this year than he had his first couple of years at Miami.
No, 100%. And I think, you know, when you're you know, you're talking, you know, narratives, man, and look, for whatever Miami isn't, you know, and I think a lot of people, you know, that's up for debate in terms of what people, you know, think or don't think of Miami. One thing is true about Miami. Miami is always in they're in the conversation. Mm-hmm. They're in people's mentions. you know, if they're good, you know, people are hating. If they're bad, they're laughing. Like, you know, so it really is interesting to me, the dynamic that exists kind of across the country when it comes to
Yeah.
Miami and what they are, you know, when they're good, and what they're not, you know, when they're bad. Because again, people are mentioning them regardless. But you know, you touched on, you know, the Mario's, you know, adaptability, right, to a certain extent, and what people thought of that, and how reluctant he was maybe to you know, loosen those reins and go to a true air raid, right? So when they hired
Mhm.
Shannon Dawson, right, a lot of people were like, Mario's not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
Mario's not going to allow him to, you know, fill in the blank, right? Mario's
Mhm.
not going to allow him to throw the ball 55% of the time, right? But what did they do? They go out, you know, they land Cam Ward, right?
Mhm.
And that narrative goes out the window, right? You talk
Mhm.
about a guy who comes in and you know, you can see the numbers, right? Everybody, I mean, from the guy came in, he transformed the program. You know,
Yep.
he led the most powerful offense in the country, throwing the ball 55, you know, percent of the time, which, you know, again, you never figured you'd see. It definitely never happened at Oregon. You know, and
Mhm.
kind of, you know, landed the QB killer, you know, moniker, you know, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of gone out the
The
window
narrative.
now. Yeah, and I think when you look at, you know, what he brought in Shannon Dawson, you're right. You kind of, you're fast forwarding a little bit, and okay, what's Shannon Dawson's view, kind of, you know, I think across the country and amongst recruits and the whole deal. And I think you have to look at what he's done now in Miami, you know,
Mhm.
and you have some proof of concept, right? You have to look at a guy who you know, you rewind to 23 when they had Tyler Van Dyke, and I think a Tyler Van Dyke, you know, who you know, in 22, you know, gave so much hope, right? And they're like, oh man, this is the next one, you know, at Miami. Then you
Mhm.
fast forward to 23, the guy, you know, the guy falls apart, you know,
Yeah.
by and large, right? And even then, when you look at the numbers, you know, and we won't, you know, dig into them or really, you know, touch on them, you know, a whole bunch in terms of just, you know, where everything ranked and the whole deal. But there, when you look at those numbers and what they did in 23, and they weren't nearly as bad as what that record showed. I think it was a Tyler Van Dyke who, you know, just when he got inside the 20 was just a turnover machine.
Mhm.
Right. You look at the picks that he threw, and he had the most clean pocket
Yep.
interceptions in the entire country. Like, you sit there and you wonder, man, what was this guy? What was this guy looking at? Like, he was seeing ghosts out there. He refused to run. You know, I mean, they literally weren't even playing for him to take off and run. And you know, the guy wasn't Lamar Jackson by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, the guy had decent wheels when he had to
Mhm.
move, and he refused. He absolutely, you know, refused to take that upon himself and get out of the pocket and the whole deal. You know, wasn't capable of coming off, you know, that first read and just throwing into, you know, triple coverage. So it kind of skewed those numbers. So I say that to say, you know, Shannon Dawson can go back to, you know, again, when we speak of proof of concept, when you're talking about coordinators, you go back to 23 and be, you know, and be like, look, you know, we outside of those interceptions, you know, our numbers weren't bad. You know,
No.
we were a decent offense, you know, from about 20 to 20-yard line, you know, and then, you know, we would just fall apart because of who was leading, you know, the offense. Fast forward now to 24, you bring in Cam, you lead the league, or you lead the country in points, in yards, in, you know, they ran the ball extremely well too. Right. So when you look at not only what he allowed Cam to do, he took a guy who was, you know, by most people's accounts, you know, at best a fourth round pick, right? And
Mhm.
that may have been putting it, you know, feeling a little bit generous to say maybe a fourth round pick, when a lot of people maybe had him, you know, later on than that, brought him in, gave him the keys of the offense, allowed him to, you know, to do his thing, to operate the offense the way he wanted to, you know, to audible and to change things around in the whole deal. And the offense flourished, right? And not only did that happen, but then the receivers, right? You talk about a kid like Isaiah Horton, who,
Mhm.
you know, up until last year, you know, and it sucks that he transferred to Alabama, you know, and the whole deal. But like, you know, a kid that blossomed, you know, and that who broke out and who was expected to have another big year if he would have stayed, right? A kid like Jacoby George, who, you know, wasn't like a five-star kid. Was he good? Yeah, you know, but you know, is not a first round NFL guy, right? Horton, not a first round NFL guy. A guy like Xavier Restrepo, right? Who, you know, listen, when that guy landed at Miami, if you would have told me that he was going to be the leading receiver in the history of the University of Miami, considering who has been there,
Mhm.
I would have been like, how much you want to lose? I would have bet you whatever money you wanted. There's no Xavier Restrepo guy who was 5'10" on a good day.
Yeah.
Not
Mhm.
not a guy who's super fast, super, just a guy who worked and turned himself into a guy who's going to end up getting drafted and the whole deal. But not a guy who's a first round pick, and not a guy like not a burner, not a guy who's 6'4", 6'5". And so, you look at the offensive staff as a whole, and you got to like what they did if you're a fan of University of Miami, and that they developed, right?
Mhm.
They brought in Cam, made him, helped him become, who he is now. The receivers of, you look at the O-line, right? The O-line had a hell of a rushing season, right? Damian Martinez, slow start, right? New offense and the whole deal. But then you blinked and, he was at 850, 900 yards and ends up with 1,000 yards that, if you look at what it is he did and how he did it, it was a pretty easy 1,000-yard season for him.
Mhm.
Right, a guy who didn't really have to tote the rock, right? When you had guys like Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle behind him and the whole deal, running behind a great offensive line. So you look at everything that went on in that offense, and if you're Shannon Dawson and you're representing, the University of Miami, you're going down and recruiting guys, you're going, look at what we did with these guys, and
Mhm.
guys who, limited. I think all across the board, you're looking at a receiving core who none of those guys were 5 stars, right? None of those guys are going to be first round picks. Now, the tight end position with a guy like Elijah Arroyo, who probably fringe, right? My money would be he's not going to be a first round pick. If you're making me bet, I'd venture to guess he's probably going to be, early second round pick. But a guy who injuries holding him back, and a guy who, again, they stayed with, right? Showed confidence in him, and look at what he became, right? Credit to Coach Woodhill and the guys on the offense helped that guy, become a stud, dominated during Senior Bowl week and everything, and turned himself
Mhm.
into a really high round pick. Again, maybe end of the first, but more than likely probably middle to top of the second round. But all across the board, if you're anybody who's on the offensive side of the ball with the University of Miami, you got to be really happy with what you put on tape and what you can take to recruits to present to them and go, hey, listen, you're probably more talented than most of these guys that we're playing. We bring you into the fold on this offense, you can do some things.
Yeah, and the interesting part going back on Arroyo is that he probably would have been a first round pick if it wasn't for his injury history as well. And he got hurt after the Senior Bowl. That's why he didn't participate in the combine. So that probably hurt his chances of becoming a first round pick. But I do think that a team will take a chance on him in the second round. The guy's an absolute stud. And that's the one thing I will give credit to Manny Diaz for. He's the one that recruited him, to give Coach Diaz credit on that one. So I do think that that just development alone of Arroyo, and then you mentioned the receiving core, as well. Unfortunately, we lost Zay to Alabama, but he had a very good year as well. Had a couple touchdowns that were called back due to offensive holdings, which is pretty sad. He would have probably had more touchdowns this year. So yeah, there was a lot of criticism the year prior to Shannon Dawson because of the quarterback play. But I did tell and I did remind some of the listeners out there that when we fired Josh Gaddis, I can't recall anybody defending the fact that he was fired so early. Shannon Dawson has the endorsement of Geno Smith, okay, Tavon Austin, Manny Matsakis, who coached under Mike Leach. If Mike Leach was still alive, okay, Mike Leach would have given that endorsement as well. Dana Holgerson, and I'm gonna say a name out there that you all should know if you love college football. Hal Mumme, the founder of the air raid offense. Hal loves Shannon Dawson. He loves Shannon Dawson, in general. So I do think that we got a good one as far as offensive coordinator goes, and I'm really glad that he stayed. Because there was rumors about getting him a coaching job at Rice, and it didn't come to fruition. I'm glad he's going to give it another year with Miami, and I like to see what he would do with Carson Beck and this offense as well. I think it's going to change a little. I know we're getting 2025 next season. I won't say too much. We'll change a little, but I do like the fact that he's at the helm now for a third year, which is good because you have consistency and continuity in your coaching staff.
And I think continuity, and that's kind of what I wanted to follow up, your words with, and I think that's the word, right? When you're looking at, continuity and what that means for a staff, especially on offense, right? Because when Yeah, when you look around the country, right, and you see turnover on staffs, right? You see it on offense, you see it on defense. I think the defense tends to overcome lack of continuity a little bit quicker than the guys on offense do, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guys on offense tend to be, it tends to take a little bit longer because again, you're working on timing and you're working on so many
Mm-hmm.
different things, right? The language and everything like that it tends to be a little bit more complex. Most people will tell you than it does on defense, right? I think, most people, especially in college, are running, a simpler, form of defense, an attacking style defense, right? And things tend to kind of catch on quicker. Whereas on offense, I think it takes a little bit of time. And I think that's kind of what is helping Miami, during this offseason now, and what attracted a guy like Carson Beck, to the University of Miami, right? Again, going back to, the proof of concept that you have right now, you have, hey, listen, look at what Cam did, right? Different style of quarterback, right? But I think if we're being honest, and you're looking at the film, and I'm a guy who, again, living in Georgia, I've seen Carson Beck play a bunch. It, some of the stuff that Cam did, right? You can look at it and say, well, Cam maybe has a little bit. Cam has a very different style than Beck, but I don't think you're looking at it and you're going, well, Cam has a way stronger arm or is way more mobile than Carson Beck. Carson Beck is a sneaky good athlete. Carson Beck has a very, very good arm. Carson Beck has an NFL arm. Carson Beck is an accurate guy. And the numbers will tell you that, he wasn't good this past season. My eyes will tell me that when I was watching Georgia football, they weren't as good collectively, right, as an offense as they had been previously, right? When you lose guys like Brock Bowers, when you lose guys like Ladd McConkey, when you lose the guys they did on the offensive line, at the running back position, and the whole deal, I think you've expected Georgia to be able to they become a program that just reloads, right? They don't rebuild, but I think they were rebuilding this past year with Carson Beck at the helm, right? I don't think he had the help that he did the year before. And so I think the numbers kind of, told a story that maybe not the whole story, right? He just, that they were really inefficient in the running game. The receivers couldn't catch a cold. They led the country and drop passes and the whole deal. Not to get too deep into what they did, but I think the continuity with the University of Miami and what they put on tape made it attractive to Carson Beck, and said, hey, listen, these guys were able to say, hey, listen, look at what we have, look at what we've done. This is what we have coming back, right? And I think they were able to convince them, listen, this is a place for you, right? You give us 1 year, right? We're gonna rebuild that draft stock, right? Because listen, before the season started, I saw several mock drafts that had Carson Beck going. He was a top 3 quarterback, a consensus top three pick, not top 3 quarterback. He's a top 3 pick in just about any mock that I saw, right? So, hey, listen, look at what we did for Cam. This is what we're going to do for you. Once that elbow is good to go, we're going to surround you with talent. And one of the things that we were kind of talking about off air was if there was any real crime, to what they did this year on offense. And I think it's a direct, correlation with what the defense didn't allow you to do, right? They didn't allow you to build leads big enough to be able to play the young guys, right? And the young guys at every position, right? Because when you look at, the reps that the guys at quarterbacks didn't get any reps because the games were never out of hand. Even though those guys were putting up 45 points a game, they were always in close games. So, guys like Judd Anderson, guys like Emory Williams couldn't get in there and get those important reps because they were never up, with enough margin, of lead. You couldn't get the guys at receiver, JoJo Trader, Chance Robinson, some of these young guys, Elijah Lofton at tight end, and maybe some of your O linemen that you were maybe trying to get some important reps for. So, if there was a crime, really was that, that valuable playing time just wasn't had by those young guys, right? So now maybe there's some question, coming into the offseason with, man, we haven't seen these guys, right? Are they talented guys? Well, yeah, the recruiting services tell you they are, right? And the offers that they had, well, that tells you that they are, but they haven't been in live game action. So it really is hard to predict what they're going to be, because they haven't been seen, right? They haven't, and last year just the defense was so bad that it just affected everything, right? You look at them on a micro level, what the defense, cost them, but now you look at even into the offseason, into the 25 season, the defense continues to cost them because of the fact that they just didn't allow them to play any of the young guys.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And going about Carson Beck, you live in the Georgia area. I have a friend that goes to church with me that he's a huge Bulldogs fan. Is it true that the fan base was divided about him staying versus him going? Was it that bad over there in Georgia?
Listen, me personally, right? And I know the majority. I know a lot of people who are humongous football fans. If I know a few Georgia Tech fans, and I know a ton of Georgia fans, right? Some Tennessee fans, some Auburn fans, but listen, Georgia fans and Georgia fans know their football, right? The majority of people that I've talked to were not excited for Carson Beck to leave.
Okay.
That was my experience. I think, the message board, I don't know what the message boards were saying. I don't subscribe to UGA message boards or anything, but the majority of what I saw on Twitter, X, the majority of what I heard from people, I think people were genuinely disappointed, that he left. I think people were speculating on different things and what may have occurred in the locker room and what have you. I think those are all people speculating. I haven't heard anything with any real substance in terms of, from everything I ever heard, the guy was a good teammate. He was obviously, aside from the talent, the whole deal, the guy, was never a bad teammate. The guy showed up, played his heart out. Did he have some rough games? They had some rough games. The team had some rough games, but I don't know that you can look at the results and everything that happened and really blame him, for any of that. I don't think they had a Carson Beck problem necessarily. With that being said, people who are maybe excited about a kid like Gunnar Stockton, maybe some of these other guys they have on the roster. Listen, if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm not taking Gunnar Stockton over Carson Beck. I think anybody who watched that Notre Dame Georgia game, listen, the SEC title game is one thing. When they got to play against an even better defense in Notre Dame, the kid, and he was a 5-star kid when he committed, but played like 1A football. Hasn't really played, and I think there's been a reason why he hasn't played. But you see him limited in the passing game. He's got good mobility, better than Carson Beck. But if I'm a Georgia fan, there is no way that I'm picking Gunnar Stockton over Carson Beck. So listen, to each his own. I mean, if you have eyes and that's what you prefer, there's no way that I would take Gunnar Stockton over Carson Beck.
Yeah, think about Carson Beck is if there were fans that did want him to go, I'm like, that's what happens when you win too much and you're overly spoiled, because the guy only lost 3 games and he faced 8 of the best defenses in college football this year and managed to get his team basically get his team into the playoffs. So I can't fault the young man. And from what I read, we just talked about the receivers couldn't catch a cold. They had about 400 to 500 yards worth of drops, for this season, which could have led to touchdowns, could have improved his numbers, probably less interceptions as well this season, comparable to the previous season when he was just basically, you said, a preseason Heisman Trophy candidate, possibly a top 5 quarterback pick in the draft. He would have come out that the following year if he would have had the same similar numbers at Georgia that he did the previous season. So I mean, I like the acquisition. He's not Cam. I do expect Miami to be a much more run heavy team this year, but I do expect them to average out the same amount of points because I do expect their defense to be better. And the reason why I say by better is that I do expect more ball hawks out of the defensive backfield this year, and ball hawks that know more or less where they're going to be in terms of their position, and that will lead to short fields and will allow Carson Beck to work more within a red zone capacity, more so than Cam did, who was basically working between the 20s almost the entire season.
No, I 100% agree with you. And you sit there and you talk about, the improvement that you expect to see, in the defense. Right. And it starts at the top, right? You get rid of, your defensive coordinator, and a guy like Lance Guidry, who I think when he was hired, I think there were mixed feelings, right? A guy who had, some good years at Marshall, especially that last year that he was there, right? They were like top 5 in every category in the country,
Mm-hmm.
right? A guy who, a guy who had been in coaching for a while, right? And a guy who I think a lot of people expected to for him to make the transition easier than what ended up, being the case, and then what ultimately ended up costing him his job, right? And I think justifiably so. I think a lot of people who, were on the fence, when he was hired, I think, they were, everything was made, was made proof positive, when they saw him, when you saw the defenses that he was fielding. There were defenses who, I think were on one hand, just the inability to adjust to anything was astonishing. Absolutely astonishing, right? No matter what you thought of the defense coming in. And I think the prevailing thought was, well, the D-line is going to be the strength of this team, right? Because of, the transfers and what we have in terms of what they were bringing back. And, the linebackers should be okay. The DBs are probably going to be, the position group that is the weakest. And I think that ended up proving to be the case, and then some, right? I mean, they looked lost. They looked, and again, you don't want to pile on, you don't want to, be negative, but it didn't look good. It didn't look like what a University of Miami, defensive backfield should look like. You're right. And I think when you were looking at the names, you assumed, well, again, I judge every position group by 3 things: talent, depth, experience, right? That's very simply put. You're looking at those 3 things, to make up your mind in terms of, okay, what do we have? What do we not have? Right. There was, in my opinion, looking at that position group, talent was lacking, depth was lacking, and experience was lacking, just kind of across the board, right? When you were looking at your before the season started, Damari Brown was supposed to be your number 1 corner. He gets hurt against Florida, is out the rest of the season. When a kid can come in as a true freshman and be the best player in a position group, especially at a position group like defensive back, specifically corner, that you're lacking. You're lacking, and you're lacking in experience, and you're lacking in depth. Period. And you're lacking in talent, just all the way across the board. And so that really manifested itself, especially the end of the season, man. When you looked at that Syracuse game, it was frustrating, maddening, whatever adjective it is you want to use, right? In terms of watching that happen, and those guys just looked lost, right? You had guys that regressed, in the whole deal. And so, I think, again, across the board as a defense, I think changes needed to happen, and they did, right? But you start at the very beginning when, and again, some of the notes, that I have here, you start at with the front 4, right? And again, defense as a whole, just making headlines, same way the offense did, just for all the wrong reasons, right? And you look at, you start at D tackle, right? A kid like, Anthony Campbell, just non-existent. You talk about transfer defensive tackles, right? Anthony Campbell, non-existent. Marley Cook, non-existent. CJ Clark, non-existent, right? Then you look at, the injuries that occurred. Josh Horton, a kid, a 4-star kid, from Georgia, just since he's been at Miami, just hasn't been healthy. They expected to play, a kid like Artavius Jones, make him at least a rotational guy, based on a high 4-star kid, right? Had the measurables and the whole deal. He was hurt. He didn't really get a chance to get on the field and be a rotational guy. Ruben Bain, a guy who played inside. He's an end, I think, naturally, but obviously that hurt the defense a lot. Him, not being around, and missing, a lot of time. Then the young guys, right? Justin Scott couldn't really get on the field, right? Armando Blunt, few snaps here and there, didn't really get on the field. And really, when you're looking at in terms of bright spots at the tackle position, Ahmad Moten, who finally, after a few years, in the system, finally, especially at the end of the year, really came around and became that guy who you needed, right? Because that body type didn't really, exist at Miami, right? A kid who's, in that 6'2", 6'3" range, 310, 320, they just didn't have that guy in the fold. And the guys who they did have, your transfers who came in, outside of CJ Clark, who was an NC State guy, but Marley Cook, Middle Tennessee, Anthony Campbell from, I think it was Louisiana,
Mhm.
so guys who just maybe some measurables, but guys who came in from the G5 level and just didn't really produce how you needed them to produce.
Yeah. Yeah, defensive line did underachieve this year. Greatly. We expected a lot more sacks, a lot more disruption. I think the scheming wasn't very good either. Way too many stunts, complicated designs coming out of the defensive line as well. One of the biggest problems also was the lack of setting the edge. That was one of the biggest problems Miami had, which goes back to the adjustment aspect of things under Lance Guidry. And I think that he fell on the sword, and that Syracuse game was the last straw for him. For me, I was like, let me give him another chance. Because let's see what he does with his guys and so on. And when you blow a 21-point lead, and all you really had to do, Will, is just bump the receiver so Kyle McCord has to hold the ball a little longer because the guy's more or less a statue, and Ruben Bain and Tyler Barron were getting to him when he was holding the ball longer. And you don't do that, that's a problem. When your true freshman is getting burned, I know it's Syracuse, but the guys that were catching the football, one of them was from Alabama, was a 4-star from Alabama playing for the Crimson Tide the year before, fronting your guys and burning your guys, and you don't leave a safety back there to provide help. That's also a problem. And I'm so sorry. Like the firing was absolutely justified. Everything you said about the transfers was true. See, Marty Cook and CJ Clark could have played a little bit better during the season as well. Simeon Barrow was a bright spot. The guy was absolutely a monster.
He was
in the interior. He was just a monster in the interior. Ruben Bain was going through injury. I don't think he fully healed throughout the season. Plus, I think he might have been a little too big because I know they were rotating him inside out. I think this year he's going to play a lot more end. So from what I understand and I heard, he has shed some weight. So that's a good thing for him. I think it'll help him with the speed and his footwork as well. The fact he's not carrying those 10 and 15 extra pounds he was this past season as well. So that's the key. If the front four, we all knew the defensive backfield was weaker. If the front four, hell, the front seven would have done its job, that backfield looks a lot better. But they just didn't. They weren't getting to the quarterback. They weren't stopping the run. Our tackles, interior tackles, were getting moved around, bullied by Georgia Tech, which was supposed to happen as well. If an Isaac Brown would find a small crease in general, you were catching them for 20, 30 yards or even the end zone. Mm-hmm. So those were all problems this year with the defense. And it's unfortunate because I liked Coach Guidry, but it was just inexcusable. I mean, Mish Powell should have been playing nickel early on in the season, not towards the end of the season. That's a more natural position for him.
Yeah. And not only when you're looking at the players, right? But I think that's one of the reasons kind of why, and you never you never like to celebrate, people getting fired, right? Because and even though it's different, right? These aren't retail people making $11 an hour getting fired. They're getting a nice, payout to leave in the whole deal. But and then you talk about likable guys, right? You talk about a guy like Lance Guidry, who's again, you watch his interviews and the whole deal, very likable guy, right? A guy with great personality, easy to talk to, right? Very personable. And then Big Joe, right? Joe Salavea. Yeah. Kind of along the same lines, right? A guy who was, super nice guy, right? You see him on Twitter, always putting out positive content. A guy who was, you can tell he really loved what he did, loved his players, was a family man, a teacher in the truest sense of the word and the whole deal. But a guy who who kind of left something to be desired, right? Because you're looking at that position, specifically the defensive tackles, and you're wondering, okay, where is the impact, right? Where is the development for these guys? Because it's not like you weren't working with some talent, right? I mean, there was some talent at this position group. Now, young talent, granted, in the whole deal, and then the transfer guys, maybe not the most talented guys on earth, but there and Simeon Barrow play right, first team All ACC in the whole deal, which is a great thing. Ahmad Moten started to show some signs, right? But I think overall, while he was at Miami, I think a position group that I think left something to be desired. I don't think it was, I don't think, we're looking at this as just a 1-year thing. It wasn't a 24 thing. I think as a body of work, I think Big Joe was somebody who left something to be desired. And then you kind of, you get out kind of to the edges and you look at the end position, a position where, a lot of young talent, right? But I think still you're really waiting for a guy like Jason Taylor to kind of take that next step as, you know, a good a developer of talent, right? A guy who is getting the most out of his talent. Because I think if we're being honest, and I don't you know want to badmouth a guy like Jason Taylor, because obviously I know what he was as a player. You know, growing up in Miami, the whole deal, I got to see a lot of him. Obviously, the guy's in the Hall of Fame and everything. But I think right now, I think I look at a guy like Jason Taylor, and I think Jason Taylor is a better recruiter / relationship builder than he is a developer of talent. And I don't know if you push back on that right now.
Maybe a little bit, only because when he coached at STA, I heard he was a great coach, and he ran the defense at STA when he was there before becoming an analyst at Miami. And from what I understand, he was hands-on with a lot of the kids like Lightfoot and Booker Pickett when he was recruiting them, and they liked what they were learning from JT. So I'm gonna throw this year off as just an anomaly, as just something that just the defense was bad overall. And I think this year will be a true test of how good Jason Taylor is as far as developing the development of talent, throughout the season. So you're right. The defensive attack ends didn't look very good. They didn't get in the backfield quickly enough, and they didn't get enough sacks. Even though they finished with 30 plus sacks in the season, but a lot of those were against Florida, against weaker teams, and they bullied the hell out of Wake Forest. So that they came in chunk games and didn't come in consistently throughout the season. But we'll see how this year goes. I do expect, according to the new DC, I do expect them to be a lot more aggressive attacking the backfield right away. So the sack number should go up, and that's will get a better gauge on Jason, how he is. Because a lot of guys that he recruited, they didn't really play. And the one that did play got a sack, which is Booker Pickett. So we didn't see that. So we'll see how it goes this upcoming season. But I get your point of view, and you're not the only one. There are some people that have been on locally on podcasts down at Miami that have said that Jason Taylor shouldn't be above criticism because, Bain sacks were down, Mesidor sacks were down in general. There wasn't, the quarterbacks were getting a little bit too much time, hence the reason why our DBs got exposed, especially against Cal as well, where Mendoza looked like a Heisman Trophy winner. So you're not wrong to have that assessment, but I'm willing to sit back a little bit and see how this season goes along before I judge Coach JT.
No, I think going back to the Lance Guidry, topic, and when you consider the collaborative nature of football staffs, right? And I think we learned that in year one with Mario, is they were calling that staff the Avengers, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about Kevin Steele and Charlie Strong. And all these guys that they have brought in, Joe Adai from Georgia and all these guys they have brought in, and they underachieved, right? And I think when you're looking at, this, what the staff was in 24, hopefully you're going to see moving forward, now with, and I think there's a reason when you're looking at turnover, right? When you're looking at what the offense brings back, which is everybody, right? And then you look at the defense, who brings back only Jason Taylor, right? I think that's a sign of what Mario saw as the weakness, right? Because they turned literally the entire staff over other than Jason Taylor. And you're looking at a position group that Jason Taylor is going to have this year. You're going to have, you're going to have one more year, or now another offseason of a guy like Booker Pickett, another offseason of a guy like Marquise Lightfoot, another offseason of a kid like Elias Rudolph, another offseason of a kid like Cole McConaughey, right? Ruben Bain hopefully is going to get back to his natural position of end. I think Akeem Mesidor, it sounds like they're talking about him being more of an end, this year. And so you have, I think when you're looking at, again, going back to, the way I like to judge a position group is talent, depth, and experience. I think you're bringing back all three when you're talking about the defensive end position. I think you have to like what you have. Now you add, a kid like Hayden Lowe, and the whole deal to that mix. And I think you have to like what you have. You were talking about attacking, right? Those guys are built to attack, right? Those guys are built. A kid like Booker Pickett, who went to Under Armour, the offseason before he came to Miami and just wrecked shop against the best O-lineman in the country, went nuts, right? And Marquise Lightfoot, kind of the same thing, right? And so these are guys who are built. They need to put on some weight in the whole deal, but these are guys who are built to rush the quarterback, right? A kid like Cole McConaughey, who led Alabama, in sacks his senior year, right? You bring in Herbert Scroggins now this offseason, a kid who led Georgia, in sacks, which is saying something, right? The state of Georgia puts out as much talent as any state in the country these days, right? With Florida, Texas, California, and the whole deal. So I think as a collective, right, you're looking at the defensive end position and you're going, talent is there, right? We've got depth, and the experience is going to come, but you have to like the position group that JT has to work with, and you figure, in collaboration with a guy like Corey Heatherman, who led Minnesota to great things, this past season. You got to assume that together they're going to be able to figure this thing out and get this position group to where it is they need to be, and not underachieve, kind of like Tyler Barron did this past year, where feasted against the cupcakes and in the big games was by and large nowhere to be found. I mean, it sounds harsh, but it's kind of the truth.
No, I totally agree with you. And it's a major year for Rueben Bain. It's year 3. If he really wants to go out and compete to be a first rounder in the NFL, I do think it's going to be a huge year for Rueben. He needs to get back to that 6-sack form that he did as a true freshman when he first got here. And I think he will. I think he will. He'll get a lot of. He won't get doubled as much because I think Mesidor is a force, right? As well. If now you can just rotate Mesidor's position a little bit, have a guy come in general. So I do think it's a make or break year for Rueben Bain. I do think you will see Rueben Bain highly motivated and wanting to destroy the quarterback, because I do think this is a year where he may want to test his waters and go into the NFL draft.
Exactly. Yeah. Year 3, as we know, right? You got to be out of high school 3 years to enter the draft. And I think, again, like you mentioned, right, the huge year, right? If you're looking at, wanting to possibly, take that next step and enter the draft, and this is, I would say the pressure's on, this year to live up to his freshman hype and be able to rebound. We know he wasn't healthy for the most part, during the year and the whole deal. Now, and obviously they're not going to tell you what exactly it is that was going on in the whole deal, but he only played, I think he played 6 to 7 games.
Yeah, that's about it.
And so, missed a good, probably, again, half of the season, more than half of the season, and obviously didn't put on tape what he wanted to. So, I think this year, obviously critical year, for a guy like Rueben Bain. And then you move on to, a position group, like linebacker, again, another position coach that was shown the door. And then a guy like Derek Nicholson, who, again, by all accounts, great guy, right? By all accounts, a guy who was, kind of in the same mold as a guy like Guidry, right? A guy who was, again, personable, right? A teacher to the core, guy who cared about his players. If you looked at the pregame, when you looked at the linebackers and getting them hype and everything, before the game started, obviously, his guys, liked him and wanted to play for him in the whole deal. But where was the development at the linebacker position, right? Where was the and then you add to that you got to remember what he was a linebackers coach /
co-defensive coordinator.
ODC,
yeah,
right. So for anybody who had any issue with Derek Nicholson being shown the door, right? I mean, he did well. He landed at University of Missouri, so so good for him, and hopefully he does well over there. But I think again, he's when you land that co-DC tag, you have to be held. You have to be held accountable, right? You have to be held to a standard, and you got to share in that blame, right? I mean, you hate to have to blame somebody, but again, it's the coaches, right? The coaches have to put a plan in place to help these guys develop, and there was very little development. If anything, it was regression, right? When you're looking at a guy like Kiko Mano who regressed, he was out there covering, he looked lost in coverage. Right. When he excelled in 23, he was a guy who was attacking the line of scrimmage. A guy was getting in the backfield, tackles for loss, and the whole deal. But in coverage, he lacked. He didn't look natural in coverage. He was getting beat left and right by running backs. Just absolutely lost out there. Now showed well in I think he was at the Senior Bowl, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And showed well while he was out there. So who knows what he saw, in terms of coaching and the difference in instruction and the whole deal. And from all accounts, looked good and showed really well in Senior Bowl practice. But, his last season in Miami just was not good, again, we'll see moving forward if it was a coaching thing, but he just wasn't put in a position to succeed.
He should have never been covering in the first place. That's not his skill. It's like putting Brian Cox. I know I'm dating myself here. It's like putting Brian Cox in coverage. Okay, or even Zach Thomas. Zach Thomas never liked covering running backs. Okay, you would say it. I don't like covering running backs, because that's a guy that likes crashing the line of scrimmage and tackling running backs or sacking the quarterback. That was not his game. You're better off in third down situations putting a guy like Bobby Pruitt. I know he's a true freshman, but he's a guy that if you wanted him to play like a hybrid position where he could play a bit of safety, you could do that because he's got the frame and the speed for it, and he's not that heavy of a guy. So that's what I would have preferred they had done. But Kiko is not a cover guy, plain and simple. Okay, I think Kiko might have still been nursing his shoulder injury. I don't know if you remember, he had off-season shoulder surgery coming into the season that may have not fully healed because he looked really bad. He was whiffing on tackles. He didn't seem as aggressive in many cases attacking the line, and if he did, guys would get past him. So I do think that might have played a role. And it might have gotten better towards the end of the season. That's why he looked a little better in the Senior Bowl. Yeah. I think he's gonna be a great player, but I think he's gonna be productive in the NFL if you use him in the right spot.
Yeah, I think with as is the case, with guys who aren't who aren't first round picks, right? I think the football as a whole, right, is so system dependent, right? And I was having that conversation with some of my buddies on the group chat. The other day is some guys are the system. Very few guys are the system, right? Especially a quarterback, right? Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, that kind of thing, but most guys have to be in the right system to succeed. Yeah. And I think Kiko is going to be one of those guys that if he ends up in the right system, I think he's going to be one of those guys that plays for a long time. A guy who's never going to be a Pro Bowler, right? Never going to be a guy who is, all pro or anything like that, but I think a guy who's solid. I think a guy who likes contact, despite what he showed this past season. I think you're right. I think that shoulder probably prevented him from really seeking out that contact that he was seeking out previously at Washington State in his first year at Miami. And going back to kind of the shortcomings of that defense, I think one of the things that I was always surprised about watching them play is the reluctance to play the young guys, right? Mm-hmm. And the young guys who were healthy, but by all accounts, the guys weren't injured. But when you're looking at what the older guys were putting on film, and you get to about game 6 or game 7, and you have to, I think you have to make those tough choices and play some young guys, right? Because they were escaping games, right? The defense wasn't closing out games. The defense wasn't, they weren't contributing in any way, shape, or form, right? Again, we go back to, what you weren't allowed to do based on how close these games were. But I think when you're looking at the defense, I think it was almost like the other way around where you should have been playing the young guys because the old guys were showing, what they had, and it wasn't much. Right. I mean, and maybe at DB, they probably didn't have the option just because they were so depleted coming into the season because of injuries. But you're looking at linebacker, for example, and you guys, you had, a Popo Aguirre, you had Bobby Pruitt, you had, a guy like Robbie Washington, when he was hurt, or I'm sorry, when he was healthy because he got hurt during bowl practice. But a guy like that guy's a heat-seeking missile, and he loves contact. That guy loves to hit people. He's 6'2", 6'3". 230, runs up like a high 4.4. Guys who had the athleticism that you figure would have helped, out with the limits that, a guy like Kiko had, and that a guy like Jalen Alderman, who they brought in, who, is a serviceable guy, but not a guy who blows you away with athleticism or speed or anything like that. So I think they were kind of well positioned to be able to justify playing young guys. And for some reason, they didn't. And again, it kind of goes back to, now whose decision was that? Was that Guidry's? Was that Mario's? Who knows? But I think they really did that team a disservice by not playing the young guys who I think we're going to find out are more talented than what the defense showed this past year and just didn't get the chance to show it.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the young guys, especially in the front seven, I think it was just the fact that they felt like they were undersized, and the last thing the staff wanted to do is have him have a season-ending injury, career-ending injury. Like Booker Pickett wasn't a big guy, neither was Marquise Lightfoot. One of the things about Marquise, he's too small. But let me say, Booker's fast, and Marquise had a strip sack in the spring game last season. So it would have been nice to see those guys get a bit more playing time. I know they used McConaughey a bit Against Florida, they use him. I know it's garbage time, but they also use him a couple times as well. He's a much bigger guy, than the other true freshmen that came in with him in his class. So that might have been a reason. But I do agree with you. I wonder what was wrong with Bobby Washington that he couldn't get on the football field, because you're right. If you watch the film on that kid when he was in high school, he's a missile, right? And he loves launching his shoulder, and he loves knocking people into the next row. So I'm surprised they didn't use him. They kept him on special teams for most of the season. Yeah. So that's a different conversation, but I do agree that they should have maybe given the young guys a bit of a chance. You're not the only one. There's other podcasters that said the same exact thing, that why not just throw them in there if you're not getting something out of the veterans as well. But we're going to see this year, man. This is their year. This is the year of the Booker Pickett's. I think one of the main reasons why Bobby decided to stay while his brother left is that they promised him, well, they told him they were going to feature him a bit more in the defense and the scheme. So that's probably why he stayed at Miami. So we'll see what happens there. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see. We didn't really pick up a linebacker, I don't think, in the transfer portal. So I do expect the core guys that are on the team to get some action this year, more so than they did last year when they brought in like Alderman and stuff like that.
Yeah, the linebacker position, I think it'll be one of those positions that I think they look at, come spring portal season. I think what I think I liked about them kind of as a whole, I think you could tell what they thought of the position groups based on what they did and what they didn't do in terms of the portal, right? You see what they did with the DBs in the portal, right? Mm-hmm. They brought in, not only did they bring in talent, they brought in depth, and they brought in, some experience. They brought in guys who had played, and they brought in guys, again, with the exception of Charles Brantley, everybody else they brought in has multiple years of experience left. Why? Because what they had, on the roster already was not good enough. I mean, you see guys like Deion Hill. Deion Hill should have never been playing at Miami. Darren Porter regressed. A guy like Jadis Richard, who, kind of was starting to get his footing, and got hurt. He's a guy who you may want to take a look at. A guy like Damari Brown, who's, super talented kid. We'll see if he stays at corner. Obviously, OJ Frederick. But I think as a whole, you could see what they thought about the position group based on what they brought in, not only the transfer portal, but in the class in terms of the recruiting class. Because, I mean, look at what they brought in. They brought in, like 5 DBs, 5 corners specifically. And so that room looks totally different, right? Linebacker is that one position group that I think that it's kind of like a wait and see, because I think you have a kid like you have Kellen Wiley, you got a Darius Hayes, you got a Popo Aguirre, you have Bobby Pruitt. So I think and remember from everything they're saying, they're going to be playing a 4-2-5, right? Which means, again, your most plays, right, you're going to have 2 linebackers as opposed to 3. So I don't think you necessarily have to be as deep at the position as maybe you would have to be if you were playing 3 linebackers. So I think they're kind of almost in a wait and see mode. Okay, let's see what spring, shows us. Let's see if we have to go in the portal, and get anybody. But I think they're showing you what they think of the roster and what they think of the individual position groups based on what they did or what they didn't do. Right? They know they're good at running back. They know they're good at offensive line. They brought in Brockermeyer at center, but outside of that, they didn't really bring anybody else in. They like what they have at O-line. I think they like what they have at receiver. They brought in CJ Daniels kind of as your big receiver. So I think they're going to let spring play out. Maybe address receiver, maybe address linebacker. But I think by and large, I think they're a team who I don't think that needs to add a whole bunch, moving forward to get ready for 25.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that they will get one more wide receiver in the spring portal. I do think that's going to happen. Only because now receivers out there know who the quarterback, who QB1 is going to be against Notre Dame. There's not going to be Emory Williams, and it probably won't be. It's not going to be Luke Nickel. So I do think that you will get one. You'll get your Damian Martinez, but the wide receiver position at the end of at the beginning of the spring portal. That's just what I think. But I think you're right. I think that they're done looking at linebacker. And those people think we should get one more, but I think that we're done at linebacker. You're right. They have a lot of guys, and the true freshman that came in, Marcelin, looks pretty good, and they're raving about Kellen Wiley. So I like those 2 young men being picked up as well. So I'm excited, man. I really am excited. This 2024 season was rough. It was a lot of highs and lows. But I think, again, this program is going in the right direction. Listen, Rome wasn't built in a day. Some schools take 1 year and they're great, and God bless them. But some schools, they take a little bit of time to develop, and I think just Miami is just taking a little bit of time. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I think you go back to what we were saying at the beginning, and when we first started, and it's nobody's happy with how long it's taken, right? I don't think anybody expected. 5-7, 7-5, 7-6, I guess, with the bowl loss. But I don't think anybody expected them to not be where they were, in 24, right? I think people just kind of and again, as Miami fans, I think people are just, there's been, I guess the silver lining is they haven't had a season like Florida State just did, right? They've never, I think they're one of 5 or 6 programs in the country that never have lost 9 games in a season, right? So they've never been, even when they haven't been great, right? They've never had one of those just dumpster fire of a seasons, like Florida State just had. But 7-6 is not good enough, right? 10-3 is not good enough, right? I think the fan base, and I think for a lot of the people around, across the country say, "Oh, you're never gonna be, the 80s or 90s." I don't think, as a Miami fan, I think you ask anybody, I don't think that's what anybody's expecting. I don't think they're expecting anybody. I don't think they're expecting the program to go back to the Orange Bowl days and winning 58 straight home games, even though they did go, 6-0 this past season at home.
They did,
but I don't think anybody's expecting, those days again. But I think what people, and reasonably so, should be expecting is a team who year in and year out is winning 9 games, 10 games. They're out recruiting, your Clemsons and your Florida States and the whole deal, and are in the mix come end of the season, right? There may be some years that, depending on what happens and, and who you lose to the draft and the whole deal, then you may not be as great. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, right? And it's something that is not feasible, right? To expect a team like Miami, based on resources, based on location, and the whole deal. I don't think it should be, something that is too much to ask for them to win 9-10 games a year. I don't think that's something that shouldn't be expected from a program like Miami in 25 and moving forward.
No, I agree with you, and I do think with the recruiting, even the recruiting we've done at quarterback, I don't see why we can't win 9 to 10 games a year. Pending, coaching changes where we have to restart an offense, which offenses take a little longer to catch up than defenses. That's a fact, but I don't see why we can't win 9 to 10 games a year. I'm saying I think that this year we're going to win 10. I think we could beat Notre Dame and Florida. Both going to be at home. Notre Dame is restructured its team because it lost their quarterback. They lost their defensive coordinator to the NFL. So I do think that Notre Dame is going to be a little vulnerable coming into Hard Rock for the first game of the season against a Miami team that they're not going to know which team they're getting, how good Carson Beck's going to be, are they going to run, how the defense is going to look under a new DC, because there's no film with Heatherman on this defense. There's film with Heatherman in Minnesota, but not with the talent in Miami. So we'll see exactly how that goes. But I agree with you. Luke's a beast, man. I forgot to mention him he is an absolute beast. He could throw it anywhere in the field. He could throw on the run. He could throw on the run. He could throw from the pocket as well. He's an absolute beast. And the kid coming the following year, Darion Coleman, who said, "Don't even talk to me," to the other schools, is gonna be a flat out beast too as well. They're comparing him to Cam Ward based upon his throwing motion, his athleticism, and his football IQ. So Miami should be good at quarterback for, like, I could say 6 to 7 years based upon who's coming, to this football team. So I'm not worried about this team at quarterback. I know I can't see why they can't go 9 to 10 wins every season if they don't make the college football playoffs. But I do think they need to do it, and I do think what I hope will is that Carson Beck is T. Martin. Do you remember that Tennessee team? That Tennessee team, the first couple seasons at Peyton Manning, were throwing it all over the place. They were outscoring teams, but they can never get past Florida. Yep. But the 1 year with T. Martin comes in, they beat Florida, they win it all. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hope Carson Beck is. I hope he's for T. Martin.
1998, I believe that was. I think it was 98 with you had Peyton Manning there that they just couldn't get over the hump, man. Florida was their nemesis and the whole
Yep.
deal, and they could beat everybody but Florida. But then a guy like T. Martin comes in, who was not nearly as heralded and not nearly as good a quarterback as Peyton Manning was, and they go on, and I think that was a team with Peerless Price and
Yeah.
all these dudes. Jamal Lewis, I think, was probably still on that team for
Yep.
Tennessee. But yeah, they go on and win the title. When a guy like Peyton Manning was the first pick in the draft, and
Yep.
they couldn't do it back in the BCS days.
I know, man.
So we'll see, man. I think again, going back to what is currently at Miami. I think if you're a Miami fan, man, I think you have to be really excited. I think when you're looking at the position groups, I think across the board you're looking at a really talented team. I think you're looking at a team who, what they don't bring back in experience, right? I think they make up for it in talent. I think you have to like what you bring back on or what you bring in at defense with a guy like Corey Heatherman, and what he's done as a coach, where he's been, everywhere he's been. He's turned subpar defenses around and made them elite defenses and the whole deal. And so I think you probably I would venture to guess he likes what he sees at all his position groups on the defense, and I think you're going to see a big change, with the DBs this year. There's a lot of talent back there. I would expect. I think there's enough there where I think in the spring you can probably anticipate a few of those guys hitting the portal, because there's a lot of dudes back there. There's you're looking at probably 13, 14 corners. You're looking at probably like 6 safeties. So you have to imagine some of those guys are probably going to see the writing on the wall and leave, kind of like Robbie Washington did, because he saw he's a receiver, don't know that I'm going to play, and then a DB saw that the wholesale changes were being made, and he's like, man, I got to go. I think he ended up at Coastal Carolina, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did.
But again, man, I think across the board, the spring will continue to play out. You'll continue to see and hear, some big things in terms of development at the different position groups, and some of these new guys that have come in, and I think if you're a Miami fan, you have to be excited about what the offseason brings, between the new guys coming in from the portal, the 25 class, and the new coaches. I think there could be some big things on the horizon for the University of Miami. So we'll see what continues to develop and what continues to come out of camp. But I think they're on the right track, man, coming off a 10-win season.
No, I totally agree with you, and I'm very excited to see what happens. I really am. And I think, like I said, I think they're on the right track. They're recruiting well in 2026 as well. They're in line for so Darian Coleman is coming in. Yeah, I think his name. They're in line for one of the top running backs in the country. His name escapes me right now as well. They're in line for Jason Lopez, who's the young kid stud out of Chaminade Madonna as well. So I listen. If you're a Canes fan, just relax, trust the process. Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's gonna take a little longer. But Rome wasn't built. Well, not much longer, I hope, but Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah,
let's just say that.
This will end up being year. We're looking at year 4 of Mario.
It could be year 4. Yeah, it's gonna be the 4th year.
Year 4. So I think that from everything I've heard, that was always the aim was year 4 to really to really be where they want to be. We'll see. I think the 24 year, with 10 wins and the whole deal, I think there's a lot to like about what happened, and what they did, and for the progress of the program and what's to come, man. So, being patient doesn't naturally occur, in the Miami fan base, but again, man, I think you're right. I think big things are in store. And I think, to me, it really does sound like they have the right people in place, to make this, progress, possible, and continue to get better. And we'll see what happens, man. But, I think, again, I think there's a lot to like and a lot to look forward to. So.
Totally agree with you, buddy. I absolutely agree with you, man.
Yeah, man. So, all right, guys. Well, I think that's going to do it for tonight, man. I think we touched on a lot, and, a good first run, for the new pod. want to thank my guy Will from 305 Sports Now. Tell the people where they can find you, man. Tell the people what you got going on.
All right. Well, first of all, you can find me on YouTube at 305 Sports Now. Just hit that like, subscribe button. Please share it as well. I got a lot of content, mostly Kane centric, because that's where my audience tends to watch more videos of. But I do cover the Heat every so often. I do cover the Dolphins as well, and I've been trying to increase my Panthers coverage. I'm working on trying to get one of the guys from the FTSN network to come on, because I want to do a lively debate on who has the toughest players. Is it the NHL or is it the NBA, based upon PK Subbart's comments about the fact that he thinks the NBA players are soft. So I want to get a basketball guy's perspective on what that being said. I will be continuing to cover the spring practice as well, based upon what I hear from my friends in the podcasting world as well. And as I told Will, before we start recording, during the week of the spring game, okay, during the week of the Miami Hurricanes spring game, I will be going on live every single day at 9 p.m. with various guests to talk some Canes football. Okay, so we'll just agree to come on. So I know I got him on. All right, I'll be talking to my other friends out there as well. So during the week of the spring game, all right, I will be going live every single night at 9 p.m. Okay, talking some Canes football, and don't also forget to follow me on X as well. Same handle, William Padron at 305 Sports Now.
There it is, man. Everybody, go ahead and on every single platform, go ahead and like, subscribe, share, do all that, man. Help out the numbers, and get this thing growing and rolling and going in the right direction, man. Looking forward to getting on with you during that week that you'll be on every day, and get in there and talk some stuff with some of the people down there in Miami, and get their perspective on everything. Yeah, man. So there it is. Again, man, want to thank my guy Will from 305 Sports Now for hopping on tonight, man. Really, really appreciate you, brother.
Again, appreciate as well.
The main voyage right here, man. Glad you were on, and we'll definitely be seeing more of you. We got a couple more things cooking moving forward. We'll be on with each other a lot more, and doing some stuff. I'll do some solo things also, and be putting out some shorts and stuff on YouTube and everything. But get this thing rolling, man, going in the right direction, and let's see where this thing goes, man.
Thank you again for having me on. I'm greatly appreciative to be on.
Yeah, brother, definitely appreciate you again, man. Appreciate everybody for watching, and be on the lookout for some more content coming here soon, man. So if you can, do me a huge favor, get on there, like the content, subscribe, share, tell all your people about it. Looking forward to getting on with anybody who wants to collaborate, wants to talk, whether it's football, whether it's basketball, soccer, or whatever it is, man. I got a list of some people that I really want to reach out to and create and collaborate with and everything, and hopefully all that materializes here in the very near future. But from my boy Will from 305 Sports Now, I'm your boy Q. Appreciate everybody for hopping on with us, man. Thank you so much. You guys have a great night, and we will talk to you really, really soon. All right.